I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Nicola Triscott, founder and director of Arts Catalyst, who for now over 20 years, you had your 20th anniversary last year, didn't you? Has been commissioning innovative art, science, technology projects, and is going to talk about a current project that's on show in Berlin with Michael Cohen and Tor van Balen. So I'll pass over.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'll talk about Revital and Tor's new work, but I'll get there in a slightly roundabout way by talking about animal biotechnology and the way we're developing animals as products, particularly in the age of biotechnology. So animal biotechnology basically refers to the use of science and engineering to modify living organisms. And the goal is really to make products, to modify animals for human use, and to a certain extent to develop microorganisms for specific agricultural and medical uses. So obviously some of the first biotechnology dates back to traditional breeding techniques which have been around since about 5000 BC, and this has included crossing diverse strains of animals called hybridization to make animals that are better suited for the purposes for which we humans want to use them. This was a project that we did with Brandon Ballinger about 12 years ago, and it was a participatory project. Brandon was working with some unemployed young people in Oldham, collecting an array of photographs which really chart the whole history of biotechnology from ancient times through to projections about the future. And he did one long wall on plants and the other ones on animals. It was an exhibition that we were doing around biotechnology back in 2002, 2003, and Brandon's project was very useful to put that into a historical perspective and show that this isn't a new thing in terms of its aims, but of course it's a new thing in terms of its tools, and animal biotechnology, of course, now mostly based around uses of genetic engineering and various types of genetic engineering. So since around the early 1980s, we've been producing transgenic animals with perhaps increased growth rates or better protection against disease, better production of lean meat. And one of the main drivers, of course, is the production of foodstuffs and the mass production of food. And mass production of food is getting increasingly mechanized. So it was kind of obvious that as soon as there was a new technology, a new engineering, that this would be adopted in the pursuit of mass production of food. Medicine's another beneficiary. That camel uses transgenic technology to kind of produce curative proteins for human use. But different animals are used for this purpose, including poultry and pigs and goats. And so these proteins can be produced in eggs or milk in the case of camels, or urine. And these are used in human pharmaceuticals, kind of producing enzymes or clotting factors or antibodies. Another usage is a projected usage is for human transplant organs. In fact, pigs are already used transgenically for producing heart valves. So part of the future is being able to switch off the part that causes the human to reject an organ from another animal, and pigs are seen as very useful potential animals for that. And then the mosquito represents planned extinction, which is something that groups of scientists are working on at the moment, to be able to inject mosquitoes or get them to absorb modified genetic material, which they will then pass on to their offspring, which means the offspring won't live till sexual maturity. So I came across this phrase, planned extinction, the other day. I thought it was very interesting in the context that we're constantly trying to save animals. So now we're trying to make some extinct. So these are all useful, but there are also leisure and aesthetic reasons for modifying animals. I think probably you've all heard of glowfish, which was the first genetically modified animal on the market. But this is a golden seahorse, which is made by putting gold into the genetic, or into a jellyfish gene, and then that's implanted into the seahorse, so it glows golden. And there are a number of technologies that have come out of genetic engineering. There's transgenics, which I mentioned about, which is kind of taking a bit of genetic material from one organism and inserting it into another organism to produce a bit of a hybrid or just to change characteristics. This was a project that we did with Critical Art Ensemble, again, a long time ago, about 12 years ago. And it was just trying to introduce people to the idea of transgenics and what might be the benefits and the drawbacks of it in kind of a non-confrontational zone, and trying to take some of just the kind of automatic cultural yuck factor out of it. Because a lot of our reactions to modern biotechnology are very rooted in the culture that we come from and the stories and myths by which our own society live by. And of course in the West we're very influenced by stories of Icarus and Frankenstein, things like that. That if you mess with nature, if you start to mix things up, then things are going to go very wrong for you. And so we were trying to unpick some of those myths and really look at what transgenic actually was as a technology, what the benefits might be, and then be able to really look at what the disadvantages could be. Another technique that we haven't explored very much is cloning, or somatic cell nucleus transfer, where you can mass produce animals by taking a cell from one animal and just inserting that cell into lots of different eggs. So you get lots and lots of near identical creatures. And then there are newer technologies, and one of the ones that relates to Revital and Tour's work is kind of gene knockback, which is where you can insert various substances into the developing embryo, which will switch off certain gene expression, or either completely or partially. So there are a lot of benefits of animal biotechnology for humans. Obviously, there are a lot of ethical issues. There are issues around the unknown potential health issues of changing the animals that we eat and the animals in our environment. There are potential effects on the environment itself if we're inserting altered species into the environment that are going to compete with natural species or that are going to propagate. What is the effect on existing animal populations, and what are the disruptions of reproductive patterns that might happen? And this is a big concern to scientists. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of animals that are genetically engineered are made sterile. Most modified genetically engineered organisms are made sterile. This is partly for environmental purposes, but of course it's a value thing. You don't want, once you've sold your very valuable genetically engineered animal to someone, you don't want them going off and breeding lots more. You want them to come back to you and buy more in the same way that Monsanto deal with their crops. There are religious objections, which I won't get into in detail, but are very complex. There are animal welfare issues which come up a great deal when I talk about my work, particularly in the UK. It's interesting when you go to different countries and talk about the work that you commission, there are different discourses around them. And then I think there's a very interesting discussion around the need for it. Why do we feel the need to alter animals? Is it really for health? Is it really for the benefit of humanity, or is it for the benefit of some humanity? Is it for the benefit of making money? So one of the things that we've been doing at the Arts Catalyst over many years is kind of introducing artists from a range of different practices to biotechnology. So we got some examples from the Symbiotica BioArt Lab that we ran in 2004, which was probably one of the first arts biotechnology labs that was ever run. There was our Mad Lab, Lab Easy project a couple of years ago, which was taken out on the streets of Deptford Market, and people came and could kind of test foodstuffs to see if they had GMO products in them. And then I guess most recently, or quite recently, there's the synthesis workshop around synthetic biology that we did with UCL. And synthetic biology is kind of the application of engineering principles to biology, so it's kind of taking genetic engineering a step further. So Revital, I met Revital when she was probably not long out of the Royal College of Arts, what's it called, the Design Interactions MA. And she'd done this photographic project. They do a lot of speculative design in the MA, Design Interactions. And she'd done this project around assistance animals, which was trying to rethink. Usually we use animal products. We use bits of animals or parts of animals or products from animals in our medicine. So she was just trying to think about if we found ways of actually using the animal itself in medicine, and how would that change our relationship with the animal. And I really like this project because so much of science and the processes of science are hidden, and people found this a very provocative project, but actually all she's doing is exposing something, is showing something that happens, the use of animals in medicine, but she's just making it much more overt. So I started talking to Revital, and her fascination with our relationship with animals that are bred or engineered for purposes or for parts with a specific purpose. And particularly now with being able to engineer animals to order for all sorts of purposes. So this is a hybrid of 3 different types of cat, and it's also hypoallergenic as well. And of course it's sterilized, so you can't have any more. So you have to go back to lifestyle pets to buy your next exotic hypoallergenic pet. You can't breed them and hand them out yourself. So what Revital wanted to do when we started talking was to bioengineer an animal that would be born sterile, that wouldn't be made sterile afterwards, as most of these animals are, but that would actually be born sterile, would be born a functional product without any capacity to reproduce. And we were talking about the type of animal this might be. So she kind of started with cat and rabbit, and I went, do you know what, I think fish would be kind of easier to start with. It would have been very easy if she'd chosen to work with zebrafish, because lots of people work with zebrafish. But she got very interested in the idea of working with goldfish, and the idea of working with goldfish because goldfish are already very modified organisms using traditional biotechnology, the biotechnology of breeding, and also they use surgery as well in Japan to sculpt the particular goldfish shape that they want. So we were trying to find a scientist who could bioengineer a goldfish that would be born sterile. And we were interested in an albino goldfish, one that would not have any pigment, so that you would be able to image it and you would almost be able to see that it didn't have reproductive organs. So we worked with a scientist called Dr. Rachel Rodman, who came and worked with us for a summer a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. It's been going on a while, this project. And Rachel's research turned up this paper which highlighted us towards Etsuro Yamaha. And he is involved in switching off particular genes in the germination stage of the goldfish to look at how goldfish develop. It's a very scientific, very pure science that he's doing. He wants to understand how development works. So we got in touch with him, and it was a long and very complicated conversation because Professor Yamaha doesn't speak much English. And at the time we had no or very few contacts in Japan. We made contact with an organisation called SAIR, which is the Sapporo Artists in Residence organisation in northern Japan, and in Hokkaido, which is the northern island, and started a exchange relationship with SAIR, which interestingly has gone on its own. So we have other artists going out there and curators. We have a whole other project around nuclear culture and Fukushima going on with SAIR. But SAIR agreed to host Revital, and by that point she was working with her partner, Tuur van Baalen. They'd fused their practices. They agreed to host them, and Kyoko Techibana, who's the curator there, agreed to arrange a meeting with Professor Yamaha, whose laboratory is in a very obscure district of Hokkaido. So he's about as far as you can get. So our nice cheap project, as we thought, started to become very expensive because we had to send 2 people and a translator to Hokkaido. And we had a forthcoming exhibition because this has been going so long. We'd lined up an exhibition at the John Hansel Gallery for this and a project we were working on with Melanie, having a mind blank, Melanie Jackson, of course. So Revital and Tuur went and they met Dr. Yamaha, but they also made another project while we were there because we were like 2 months away from this exhibition that we'd set up. So they made a film. Around the Japanese national goldfish competition, and particularly the breeding of a goldfish called the Ronshu goldfish. And this was really nice because the exhibition was about the creation of form in art and science, and how ideas exchange between science and culture. And Melanie's was a sculptural project, and also using video, and especially about form. But this was really nice because I thought it looked at a very ancient tradition of the use of form in living creatures and the value of form. We're showing this piece in the sharing space in Berlin, and Kingyo Kingdom, which is the name of that film, is alongside it. So through 2 trips to Japan and lengthy meetings with Professor Yamaha and a lot of discussion, he was convinced to produce a series of 45 sterile albino goldfish for the artists. They were not conceived as animals, the artists write, but made as objects, unable to partake in the biological cycle. And so what he does is he takes the eggs and the sperms and kind of does an IVF process, and then the fertilized egg he injects with morpholinos, and these they're a chemical which switch off the gene expression, which would then go on to develop the gonads in the fish. and this is one of the 45. And alongside that is a kind of parallel commission called Sensei Ichigo. And while they were working with Dr. Yamaha, Tura and Revital got very interested in the processes of what he was doing and thought it would be a very interesting metaphor to mechanize the whole process. As they're mass producing animals constantly, what if they could mechanize the whole process of sterilizing these goldfish and mass producing them? So the machine, which is functional, the artists have put a great deal of work into making it functional, is constantly in standby mode. It isn't switched on, and it's not going to be switched on. But it sort of sits there in the gallery embodying the question of whether we really want or need to accept the technologies that are available to us just because they're available to us. This is Dr. Yamaha. This is his lab, somewhat different from the ones that Anna has been showing us. This is another part of his lab. And this is actually how he extracts the eggs and sperm from the fish, takes them out and squeezes them. And then injects the morpholinos under a microscope. So I just wanted to show another film. This is from Norway. This is about the vaccination of salmon. But I think it's interesting because it shows how mechanization are getting into areas that we didn't realize. This is just about a minute. Scoops the fish out, sends them through the machine. Vaccinates the fish. I always think they look quite startled. Sticks them back in the water. So this extraordinary mechanisation, and just to show a bit of how detailed the artist's work were, this is them testing the injection mechanism, which they did by using sushi eggs. So the whole work is really concerned with the processes and the ideology of engineering and mass production as applied to living systems now and to animals, and the idea that we can standardize living systems, we can standardize human labor, we can standardize fish, and we can standardize reproduction processes. And I think it asks very important questions about that. And about what is the status of the fish, this edition of 45 fish. Are they animals? Are they products? Are they objects? Are they artworks? The most common reaction we've had to the fish is concern, which is often expressed as concern for their welfare, but they're fine, they're healthy, they're looked after extremely well. So maybe what are the other reasons for this concern that keeps being expressed to me about this project? Is it a question about the need for these fish to exist at all? The question of whether we should produce genetically engineered, modified animals at all, or for some purpose, but not other purposes? Is it okay to produce them for science and medicine, agriculture, but not for art? Is it okay for art, but not for commerce? Is it that it's had its reproductive potential removed? Are there religious objections to it existing in the first place? Do we just feel that we shouldn't be tampering with what God or nature has presented to us? Why do we feel so uncomfortable with these fish? And how do we start to unpick these questions? So I'm running out of time, but I was just interested in coming back to the machine a bit. As you can see, in the gallery it's set up to look in the way that it's producing the fish. It's a machine that exists to produce non-reproductive living beings, although it won't be switched on. And I think this provokes a really ambivalent feeling in us, because it seems to say that life is reproduction and I can produce reproduction. Producing a living thing but eliminating at the same time, stealing the potential for reproduction. And maybe the animal's uniqueness appears to be removed by this process of mass production, although the 45 are very distinctly different. It's maybe we see it as a form of identity theft. So I'll finish there because I'm 25 minutes in, and invite questions.
Okay, we have got 5-10 minutes. Questions? Who wants to start?
Just really quick. Was a fish chosen? Why was the fish chosen as opposed to, say, a cat or a dog or something that probably has more emotional impact? Is it because they reproduce more quickly?
To be honest, it was durability. I am working on another project with Leonardo cats, who you've probably all heard of, who's going in another direction, and that's going to take a very, very long time. But I think Revital was keen to produce an artwork.
Practical considerations.
There were practical considerations, but also, there is this thing that we do feel more concerned about the bunny rabbit than the fish. We just do. That's another thing we need to unpick as well.
Was that part of the discussion in choosing the organism about the relationships that humans have with animals and how the work that might be received?
It always is. It's like, at what point do we start to care? Is it between invertebrate and vertebrate? Is it some notion of sentience? Is it some notion of consciousness? Is it some notion of intelligence? Where do we start to care what happens to these living organisms? So it's always part of a conversation when we're working with an artist, absolutely.
And in terms of presenting it to the public, obviously consideration of how it's set up and how it's contextualised. How much is written? How much information do visitors receive or need to receive, or are they invited to engage with the artwork and then unpick it from there?
They're given the mechanics on it. If they want to read, they can pick up a sheet of paper that basically tells them that the fish are albinos, that the fish have been sterilised through bioengineering, and roughly what the process is, very, very briefly in lay terms, and then what the machine is capable of doing. Because we had a long discussion and felt it was quite important that people knew that the machine was capable of sterilising these goldfish. Otherwise, it's a very ambiguous object sitting in the space. And so it's left there, but we don't raise the issues. We don't suggest how people might think about it or look about it, or even the questions that they might ask.
Are you capturing that audience response in any way? Are you doing events?
Sharing organised a big conference around it, but which is very scientific and all in German, so I didn't bother to go because would have. But when we bring it over to London, which we shall be, then we'll be doing a lot more about capturing. But also, you can tell because I'm going very slowly, this is the first time I've talked about the project, and so it's very interesting for me to get people's thoughts actually, and I think they'll be very different in Germany. I think Germany people were much more interested in the mechanisation, the machine aspect, the removal of the human from the process actually. In the UK, I think it's inevitable that people will be more interested in animal welfare issues.
Have there ever been any, within your discussions, exposure, engagement with this project, have there ever been any discussions about consciousness? In particular, because you talk and you've raised an extraordinary amount of questions to do with the work, the issues and the ethical ramifications and the nature of mechanising an organic thing, and are organics a different kind of mechanism? Is it simply a more complex order of mechanism? You've asked a lot of extraordinarily interesting questions. I wonder whether or not you've ever touched upon the idea of consciousness, because within science you can't measure it, and therefore it's often excluded from discussions of this nature, unless it's within a religious framework, which I don't always think it should be. And I was just wondering if you touched upon that at any juncture in this engagement with these ideas.
We have I suppose we have discussed it in that we've discussed how goldfish feel and memories and what scientific knowledge we have about
Their experiences.
their experience, how long they can remember experiences, things like that that scientists have actually been able to measure. And beyond that, it's just a balance of compassion and law. I mean, because there are very, very strict requirements for how you treat, display any organism, particularly vertebrates, of course. So we've got the German Department of Agriculture telling us, just coming in and checking that we've got some, I mean, it was all very stark in the opening. You'll see they're in completely empty tanks. If you actually go and see it now, you'll see there's gravel and stuff for them to swim through. So,
But that, in a weird way, I assume is to do with the question that the artisan project is asking. I mean, this weird mechanisation, sterilisation. In a weird way, it's turning it into a hygienic, mechanistic process as opposed to one that we are more familiar with.
yeah, and we kind of wanted to show how it is, because actually in the labs, the fish don't have a nice life. They don't have gravel and things to swim through. There are hundreds of them in these great big tanks. So we're treating them much more nicely because there are different rules that apply for public display, which is very interesting again, because it comes back to the issues that Anna raises about how animals are treated within a scientific framework and how they are treated in a public or other framework.
Okay, another question.
I raised so many questions and so many thoughts. But one I wanted to explore was the idea that this is an addition. So these goldfish have a lifespan, and so the artwork will only persist for a certain amount of time. And whether there was a drive to persist this artwork by recreating more, because inherent in the way these fish are created is the fact that power is with the artist to create further.
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. And the other thought I had, and I thought it would be interesting to explore more, is the distancing of us as producers, whether it be of art or food, from the actual dirty, mechanised process, sterile mechanised process, by putting in place this machine that separates us from the animal. And I wondered how important it was for you to show the two in conjunction, whether you thought the machine would work by itself. Because I was drawn to a very recent exhibition in London, actually. It was Thomas Dane Gallery. It was John Gerard who'd done this computer simulation, and it got all the headlines because it was a computer simulation of the Google data farm. It was actually based on an earlier work he'd done of a computer simulation of a pig farm, a big mechanised pig farm. And his view was entirely the exterior view, and from the outside it was a very slow panning shot of this data, effectively this entirely mechanised building. Absolutely fascinating. Really recommend checking it out if you can. And not a sign of life, and not a sign of an animal. And that somehow was really powerful. So I just wondered if you had thought about presenting the fish and this kind of emotional contact at the same time.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of discussion about the production of the machine in the first place, because it was another practicalities. It was a very expensive machine to produce because it had to be functional. It was important to the artist that it had the potential to do what they said it did.
This exhibition has the potential to sell.
Yes, it has the potential to make further additions.
Yes, that's the word.
If we get the goldfish sperm and eggs, or goldfish that produce sperm and eggs, of course ours can't. So we'd still have to source them.
That's what you couldn't reproduce.
Ours don't have any reproductive organs. So we'd have to go back to Japan, or whoever could source, I think it's called a albino comet goldfish, to get the eggs and sperm to do the process. But once we've got the eggs and sperm, then we can do it with the machine. However,
it's not quite dressed.
I'm going to speak on behalf of the artists and say they're not going to do that, or they told me they're not going to do that, and that's it. It's an edition 45.
So it doesn't tour.
It will tour, we've got to keep them alive.
But I was going to say, just for a very short amount of time.
We've got to well, no, if we treat them well, they could live for 15 years.
Really?
Yeah. We could tour this a lot. I mean, but we were obviously very worried when they came over from Japan. We thought we were going to find 45 very sickly, bioengineered, traumatized, albino, gonadless fish turning up, but they were 45 healthy, very beautiful. I mean, some are kind of almost transparent, others are really silvery, some have a kind of mottled orange and silver. I mean, the ones we've put in the gallery at the moment are the most albino and transparent. The coloured ones are at the back in the fish tank. We have aesthetics to think about there.
I love the way that the aesthetic is the driving force behind it.
Well, it is with our products, you know. I mean, her inspiration was these kind of lifestyle pets and the fact that we're producing things for the specific reason. And one of the reasons that we want things is aesthetic purposes.
I thought it was really good that you separated entirely from the arguments of creating food or creating, so those sort of creating medicine, you made it entirely aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the edition is, which you picked up on beautifully, is the edition makes it very clearly an artwork and all the questions that raises about being an aesthetic
Just
product.
the absolute purest sense of creating something for creation's sake. Can't, possibly justify it for world peace.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
we've got time for one more question.
Thank you. It was very interesting and challenging in every aspect project, but my question is, how do you fund these projects and how you select the artists? So what are the more kind of practical processes?
I saw Revital's graduation show. I saw Revital's graduation show, and I heard her talk about her work, and she was getting a lot of flack for it because it was very provocative, her life support pieces. But I thought she was she was so thoughtful how she thought about her work and how she talked about her work. And then, of course, it takes a long time from meeting an artist to starting to work with them, for them to have an idea that you find interesting and challenging enough. So that's kind of how it happens. I mean, how we work with artists is that we go to a lot of stuff and we meet a lot of artists, and it's just about seeing something.
So it's not a thing that you put yourselves and you call artists to respond on that, or you don't?
No, we haven't. We've done occasional open calls. Yes, we have. And I like to do them from time to time because it kind of opens up the territory, and I get to find artists that maybe I wouldn't have come across otherwise. So I do like to do open calls from time to time. But most of our work is the traditional going to exhibitions, meeting artists, that thing that artists find so mysterious but actually isn't mysterious, it's just a lack of time. You can't get around to everybody in every exhibition. And then just occasional, and then the other thing that you can never quite express is that artwork or that idea that makes you go, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. And the other thing it does is that the Arts Catalyst does have these kind of trajectories of inquiries. We do. I mean, there are certain subjects I'm not that interested in, not likely to be doing a work around the theme of biotechnology and its ethics has been a driving theme for a long time, ever since I set up the Arts Catalyst. It's going to keep popping up in our work. I think the interrogation of science and technology in our society and our culture is not done enough. So that's why I'm still at it 20 years later.
And how do you fund those projects?
How do I?
Fund.
How do I fund the projects? Well, it's getting harder and harder. We are Arts Council funded. We have been for about 15 of our 21 years. We've been irregularly funded. And then the rest of our money that comes from trusts and foundations and consultancy fees and talk fees, not here obviously, but other places, especially if it's a more polished talk, we'll charge people for it. And the ways that we don't sell anything. We don't sell artworks. The rights stay with the artists. We've been challenged on that many times, but I feel we get public funding. It's difficult if we're taking public money then to kind of make private money. I'd rather the artist did that. take their work and sell it, and that's totally fine. So, I mean, occasional events we charge for, but we make nothing really from that at all. It's mostly to make sure that the seats fill up.
Thank you.
So it's always a challenge. European Commission, we've had done quite well out of, like the Creative Europe, and before that Culture 2000. So we do a lot of kind of cultural consortia with European, like-minded European organisations.
Not Japan,
Actually we had funding.
Institutions don't co-fund ever.
Yeah, well, the Daiwa Foundation fund art and science, and they funded both Revital and Tours residency and a curator residency. Yeah, so we're making inroads in Japan. But they're not that interested in this project because, like, biotechnology, goldfish, whatever. Over here it's really exciting. In Japan it's like shrug.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you very much, Nicola.